Hello. I'm so glad to be here with you today to share a story. And I think perhaps it is no surprise that I like doing this because I think stories are powerful, right? Story narrative is how we as humans create meaning, help us understand our own lives and the world around us. And there is deep meaning to be found in sharing and in hearing stories. But there's something I want to notice this morning before I move into the story for today, and that is that there are many different meanings to be found within stories. Even the same story that you've heard many, many times over again, you can find different meanings in because you come to it with something different, but also because one of the things that matters in story is where you as the listener place yourself in the story. Who do you identify with? And what learnings do you find from that? And also, it's really important to notice who is telling the story, because perspective matters as well, doesn't it? So the story I'm going to share with you this morning is a retelling of a very old story. It's a Sufi wisdom tale. And there are many different versions of this story, but all of them include a fox. But we're going to get to the fox in a little while, so you know somebody who's coming in this story, but we're going to start with a person. And this person is a woman who had lived a fair number of years. She was an adult, and she had a pretty nice, comfortable life. She had what she needed, and she was devoutly religious, and she was somebody who felt like she was really a good person, that she tried to do what was right. And she felt as though, even though she had done things in her life that she thought were good, she had tried to live a good path in her life, something felt unfinished. Something felt unfulfilled. She wasn't sure what path she should take. And so, as she reflected on that, she began to think that what she needed was some kind of message about where she should go with her life. Now, one night, she had a dream. And in that dream, she saw the great provider who invited her to take a walk in the woods. When she woke up the next day, she thought, well, maybe, that's a strange dream, but maybe that's a message. So maybe I should go take a walk in the woods today. So she did. And she began to walk, and she walked further and further than she had ever been in the woods. And after a time, she noticed some movement out of the corner of her eye, and she looked. She had just come to a clearing, and she looked, and over on the edge she saw a fox. And this was an unusual fox that she saw because she could tell that the fox had been injured sometime in the past. In fact, its front legs had been terribly injured, and she knew it was a while in the past because it had healed, but she thought that the injuries were so great, it looked to her like it really wasn't possible that the fox was able to use its legs any longer. But what she thought was most curious about the fox is that it looked pretty content and pretty well fed. She thought that was confusing because she didn't see any way that the fox was likely to be able to feed itself. Foxes are predators. They need to be able to hunt, right? So she decided to wait and see if she watched the fox, if she could learn something about it and how it managed to be so fed and content. And so she drew back so that she was kind of sheltered, but could see the fox. And she waited, and she watched. And she watched for a long time, and she began to feel hungry herself. And she was actually just about to turn and head back home, thinking that maybe it was all a mistake, and there was nothing there for her anyway, when she heard a noise and saw movement on the other side of the clearing. Now, when she saw what had emerged, she became frightened. Because do you know what it was? It was a tiger. And the tiger was dragging some meat. Clearly, it had been on its own hunt and had gathered some food for itself, and it was dragging it into the clearing so it could have its meal. She was so frightened that she couldn't move a muscle. She did not want the tiger to notice that she was there because then she might become the next meal, right? So she stayed as still as she could, and she watched. And the tiger ate for some time. And then it looked over to the other side of the clearing, and then the woman began to be a little bit less frightened for herself because she was more frightened for the fox, because she could see that the tiger was looking right at that fox. Oh, that poor fox, she thought. There's no way it will be able to get away. But the tiger continued to look directly at the fox, and then it stood up, it turned, and it walked away. And after a little while, the fox itself began to move, and it began to push itself into the clearing using its back legs. And when it reached the meat, it began to eat. And it ate until it had just about finished everything that was there. And then it pushed itself around and headed back to its den at the edge of the clearing. And then the woman knew that she had been given a message indeed. And she, as she walked home, reflected on what she had seen. And she thought, that fox was worthy of help, of being provided for. Surely I, who have been a good person all my life, who have been devout in my faith, surely I too am worthy of being provided for. What it is that I need to do is have faith that I will be taken care of too. And so she went home. And you know what she did? Nothing. Well, not quite nothing. She waited. And she prayed and she thought and she reminded herself that what she really needed to focus on was her faith, as to the faith that she had that yes, she too was worthy, that she would be provided for. Do you know what happened? She grew hungrier and hungrier, and nothing arrived. And she continued to wait until eventually she began to grow weak from hunger, and she fell again into a deep slumber. And in her sleep, she began to dream, and in her dream the great provider arrived again. And she said, "What has happened? Am I not worthy? Did I not receive your message? I have faith. Why have you not seen fit to provide for me the way you provided for the fox?" And the great provider smiled at her with great kindness and said, "Oh, child, indeed you did receive my message, but you learned the wrong lesson from it. You were not meant to be the fox. I was inviting you to be the tiger." What are we, as individuals and as a faith community, hungry for today? Are we hungry for justice? Are we hungry for a world in which the inherent value and dignity and worth of every person is lifted up and respected? I would like to ask us where we see ourselves in this story, right? Do we see ourselves as the woman when she waited and waited to receive the gifts of abundance? Or do we see ourselves as the tiger? Thank you so much for joining me for this story this morning.